needed people to recognize that their rights are being violated. And that solidarity that they experience by having the recognition is very vital for somebody who is in a dark cell, not known by others.
What is the outcome of your reports? So you reported and then?
Well, in the case of, let me again do a bit more detail on what I do. In addition to reports, I write in communications to governments. Sometimes they're confidential, sometimes they're public. And these can be of three types. One would be where I speak to a specific violation. So I identify X, Y, and Z as a victim of violation and ask the government to respond to the case and address the issue. Another type would be when I have information that someone is facing an imminent violation of their rights. So I alert the government to the challenge and ask them to take remedial measures. A third is what I call the other type, which is when I address a broad situation and ask governments to address these issues. In my work on Iran, which I did for 6 years, and my current work is only 18 months, so I'm referring to that, I found almost consistently, every time the UN took up an issue, the Iranian government, at least for a while, took a step back. In some cases, they went ahead and did what they were going to do, but in many cases, they would take a step back. And one of my, if you like, fun moments, so to speak, my Iran time is the fact that for 6 years running, I spoke about death penalty in Iran, the fact that children were being sent to death row in Iran. And I'm happy that last year they made some amendments to the laws. They haven't gone beyond that, but they made amendments to the laws which will now dramatically decrease the amount of execution in the country. Well, it's an important step, but not enough. But nevertheless, the fact that the UN was engaged in exposing this practice is a comfort that I derive from having worked on that.
Interesting, tonight we will award our Freedom of Speech Award to Mr. Sabakalam from Iran, so that shall be interesting. Maybe we can address some questions to him as well in that regard. Mr. Shaheed, when we talk about religion and wars and violence, it's often so that we think religion stirs violence. Is there anything, or could you talk a little bit about if religion communities can also help to overcome conflicts?
Well, you're right. We often see, across the world, religion implicated in all sorts of rights violations, violence in the name of religion, from terrorism to mass atrocities, even genocide. We've seen that in our living memory. So we need to be therefore wary of that. But we also forget that religion is a powerful force for the good. It has been historically, even today, mobilized to advance human rights, to support individuals, and to build societies which are resilient. So,
could you give us some examples for that?
Well, historically, if you look at how the Latin American region came out of a dictatorship, the church played a huge role in ensuring that there was resistance against the authoritarian rule. In the U.S. context, Reverend Martin Luther King is a leader who led the civil rights movement. In present-day time as well, we see a number of faith-based leaders working together to contest xenophobia, to push back on the use of religion for ill purposes, and to create understandings amongst these communities. These have not really been that great, but one should, I think, note some efforts that have been made in this direction. The Marrakesh Declaration, which I haven't endorsed because there are issues with it, nevertheless presents an idea that these countries can get together and talk about citizenship, that we recognize, regardless of religion, everybody has equal rights to citizenship. So there are efforts being made to advance that. I also believe that the best way to contest the abuse of religion for wild purposes is to use those positive religious resources to contest and defeat them. So I would argue, for example, that when a country has space for religious freedom, we can contest those hateful narratives. Whereas when there is no space for religious freedom, we have maybe one extremist idea, and that becomes the norm, and you can't challenge that.
We're here at a media conference, and I wonder if we as media people, as journalists, maybe focus a little bit too much on the dark sides of religion?
I think, we should never on the side of not shouting out the alarm. I think we should always raise the alarm so that people can then draw attention to that. But we should also be responsible in how we address the issues, because sometimes I think, given the way the news cycle works, given the way the global media, the global society works, we are happy just to raise the alarm all for that story, but not look at how the positive elements work. And maybe bad news is more sexy than good news. Maybe that's one reason why there is a preponderance of that. Having said that, if you look at, say, any religion, the world's major religion, say Islam for that matter, 1.2 perhaps billion people are associated with Islam. But we often only hear of a minority who go and blow up places. Of course, we should talk about this because we have to address this issue. But we would never say that, today 1 billion Muslims went to the mosque and didn't burn anything. That's not news. But news is what is really, what people want to hear about. That's important, I would say, because we have to address that as well.
I have one last question for you, then I will pass on the microphone to the audience, so get ready. Get prepared to ask some questions yourself. This is my last one for you. The topic of this Global Media Forum here in Bonn is the inequality in society. How can religious community help to overcome inequality?
Well, we have first of all recognized that religion can be a site for patriarchy and therefore inequality and hierarchy as well. We have to recognize that fact. But we must also recognize how religion also promotes egalitarian ideals, solidarity, community spirit, and have always been very effective in supporting the underprivileged, the marginalized, whether it is a case of humanitarian appeals or responses, charitable work. On the welfare side, religion does very well. So there are many, many different ways in which we could use that. And finally, I want to add that what I'm promoting is the freedom of religion or belief. And inherent in that freedom is a commitment to equality. And that equality means that everybody has that right. So we often associate patriarchy with religions, but the idea of freedom of religion or belief means that women also have equal rights as men with regard to religion. So there are many ways in which we can use religion as a resource to support the underprivileged, support the marginalized, and promote equality. But we should also be mindful that we have seen historically, and even today, religion used to support patriarchy and hierarchy.
Exactly. I just wanted to stress that fact. Isn't it a little bit naive to say religion supports or fights inequality when we look at the hierarchies in churches, in all religious groups? Very often the religious leader are living a quite pompous life. They build great mosques, great churches, and it's paid by the money from fairly or rarely or rather poor people. Isn't this kind of a distraction when a mismatch of what you're saying?
Well, you could say that possibly of a lot of social institutions which have organized structures and hierarchies and leaders. No one is denying the fact that organized religion causes problems. What I'm saying is we should recognize that and find ways to address that, but also promote the awareness that religions are about individuals, their right to find what works for them. And in that capacity, everybody has equal rights. And that's why it's important to look at religion from the lens of a human right, from the lens of religious freedom. And mind you, nearly every religion began as a protest against oppression and was, in fact, designed to advance freedom and equality for everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Shaheed. The floor is yours, ladies and gentlemen. It would be great if you introduce yourself so we know who you are and address a brief question. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm from Uzbekistan. My name is Talim Rahmatov. I work as a journalist in private news website kun.uz. So my question is only one, and how would you evaluate religious reforms in Uzbekistan? Thank you.
Well, as you will know, I was in Uzbekistan last year for a country visit, and I went there because, of course, they invited me, but I wanted to go there because it was a country with a fairly poor record in respect for any freedom, including freedom of religion or belief. But I went at a time when there was a change in the presidency. So there was a window, we assumed, of hope. And over the 6 months since then, I have been encouraged by some steps that have been taken. And last week, I welcomed, cautiously, I welcomed the Parliament's promulgation of an action plan with specific measures, specific times, and specific agents, and specific mechanics of achieving the recommendations I made to them. So what I'm saying is, this is a very good plan, good to have made public, but we also want to see them doing it. So I think there is a window of opportunity in that country, but they're batting very low down the order. It's a long way to go. And if they don't go down that route, then the country has a lot of problems to face.
Ute Schäfer, Deputy Head of the Deutsche Welle Academy, what is the Training Center and Media Development Center of Deutsche Welle. I'm very interested in the good performers, because we always speak about the deteriorating situations where religion is used as a trigger for other conflicts. Sometimes it's even organized criminality which is linked, and religion is only used so to separate societies. So could you give me some encouraging examples where a political elite is keen on using the freedom of religion to create peace and a consolidated society?
Well, in this day and age, it's difficult to find very clear examples of that. But there are many instances when faith leaders have come together and promoted the common identity. I was in Albania last year. Albania Albania post Anwar Hoxha has been quite liberal, but it still takes an effort on the part of their faith leaders to come together and work together. What they do is, at important occasions, the government and the faith leaders, appear together, they work together, talk together, they address common concerns, they express their common interest in the Albanian identity rather than separate faith-based identity. So that's one, I suppose, case of where people work together to maintain that cohesion in society. We often find the reverse, where people sort of, divide up society according to their divisions, maybe sometimes within their own religions, and use that as a way to attain political, I think, mileage. There are more examples of that than of the other type. I might also note that since 9/11 and since the Daesh a few years back, there's been a lot of activity designed to bring people together. So the UN, for example, 2 years back, brought in a number of faith leaders and actors and humanists and others together in Beirut to determine whether faith groups can make commitments to advance human rights. Thomas, the president of the institute, was a participant in this exercise. And what we did there was develop 18 commitments amongst the different faith leaders to advance the human right to freedom of religion or belief, and in fact make a commitment to contest narratives of hatred and division. So what we agreed to do was, when somebody is being targeted on account of one's faith, maybe a blasphemy allegation against somebody in Pakistan or elsewhere, we ask and anticipate every faith leader to stand up, including those of the community who are accusing this person of having made the act. So that kind of cross-faith solidarity is what we're looking for. There are some examples of this, but this happen at the moment, not at political level, but they do happen at the level of faith leaders. The SDG, the UN's Sustainable Development Goals Initiative, I think will bring together a lot of these actors. There is, I think, based out of Bonn, the international, it's called IPAD. It's about supporting the development process through religious freedom, is one example. There is an international panel of parliamentarians with some 70 countries taking part in this, all designed to work together, to stand together. What they hope to avoid is this idea of special pleading. That is, if a Muslim is detained in, say, somewhere in a non-Muslim country, then only Muslims stand up. If a Christian is detained somewhere, then only Christians stand up. No, we're saying everybody ought to stand up for the human rights of everybody. So creating that cross-faith, cross-border, multi-faith championing of human rights is an important start.
Thank you. More questions? Yes, please. And then there was some over there. Sir.
My name is Ghazanfar Ali Khan. I represent Saudi media. To my mind, it seems that the religious narratives have a lot of disparities. I'll give you some examples first, and then I will ask you some questions. First example is that there have been a lot of regional conflicts in the Middle East. Palestinian-Israeli conflict is one of the oldest one. The Palestinians call it freedom for a struggle, and the Israelis call it that they are fighting for their rights. And in fact, all efforts in the Middle East is hampering the peace process so far. Another example is we don't call in the Gulf, we don't call Islamic State as Islamic State. It's a terrorist group. Of course, everyone knows. But it's not Islamic State for us. We call it Daesh. So how come the Islamic narrative is always linked with the negativities? I'll give you another example from my part of the world. I am an Indian, but I am working there in the Gulf. When it comes to the Kashmir question, Pakistanis call it a struggle for freedom. But when it comes to India, India says that it's a cross-border violation and cross-border fire. So how the UN agencies or the observatories or the media around the world is working to unify these kind of things so that we don't fight in the name of religion, in the name of, non-stage actors who have been creating problems for different countries, or in the name of religion, caste, ethnicity, creed, and color.
Okay, thank you for that question, which has many, many questions attached to it. I think I can only give a very generic response to that. We've seen over the past 30, 40 years an increasing visibility of religion in public life. It was normal to have read in books 30, 40 years ago that religion was on its way out, and we are living in a very secular society. But since past 3-4 decades, we've seen religion become more visible in public life. Whether it's Iran or the US or Europe or South Asia, we've seen religion, public religions, strong public religions may have come back. So in that context, we've also seen conflicts that were seen as secular previously take on increasingly religious tones. So if you monitor debates, studies about the Arab-Israeli conflict, you would hardly find any overtones of religion pre-1990s. But from that time onwards, you've seen increasingly religion being deployed by one or other side as part of the narrative, or by advocates of one or the other side. And I think this is part of the times we live in. Kashmir is the same. Kashmir has been going on for now, I don't know, maybe more than half a century, even more. But only from the 80s onwards, you find religion becoming part of the division. Of course, identity-based religion was part of it, but nevertheless, seeing it as a conflict-based on religion is a much more recent phenomenon. So I think we have to see how religion has become more of a force in politics and the media in the past, I think, several decades as part of that. You mentioned Daesh, Islamic State, and the negative image of Islam. I think, depending on who you talk to, religion can have a negative image itself. And of course, if you look at some of the global media reports, if you look at some of the incidents we see in terms of, mass atrocities, very often we have violence in the name of Islam implicated. Of course, there are other religions used as well, but we find, in recent times that some of the worst actions taken in front of the media, so to speak, in media's presence, has been by people acting in the name of Islam. And also, if you look at how politics and religion interacts, it's in the Islamic world you find that the idea of state religion using a particular religion is most predominant. So whenever religion gets drawn into politics, then you have these negative implications that come from it. So that's one response to that. Now, what are we doing about it? How can we deal with this? Well, we're still learning how to deal with this, I should say. Because if you look at the UN's global strategy on dealing with counterterrorism, it was announced now 11 years ago. It'll have a most recent review this summer. We're still finding that good practice is very hard to find. We can find a lot of bad practice. And that's partly because some of the pathways that lead from say, narratives to violence is difficult to really replicate or really understand. But we do know that certain conditions are required. First of all, of course, there's the idea of using religion for inspiring hate. We have seen clear cases of people using hateful interpretations of religion to advocate violence, and people do get radicalized based on that. At the same time, we also understand it's more than religion. It's also about some of the other factors that create this condition. So conflict which are not resolved can exacerbate the situation, as does economic challenges, political marginalization. So there are some background factors and there are some trigger factors as well. So we have to address this in the entirety. What I am saying is, let us not view religion as the culprit here. Of course, in many cases it is. But let's look at how religion can be a positive resource to address this. What I mean by that is this, that religion has a number of positive elements to it, about equality, about solidarity, about love, about reaching out to other people, about uniting people together. It can give a much stronger emotional foundation to bring people together for good than some dry discourse about what my rights are. So I think we can use the immense power, immense influence faith leaders have in their communities for good, and by a large margin, by overwhelming number of faith leaders are working for good. So there is hope that, in my view, by using religion as a resource, we can actually push back some of the hateful narratives. A good example here would be, rather than let hardline mullahs dominate the TV and the media, let's hear some other voices, some faith leaders who have a more moderate, tolerant tone, and see if that discourse can affect young minds that whatever faith one believes in is about peace, love, and freedom.
That's a very important point, I think, for us journalists. Let's hear some other voices. Let's broaden the spotlight. Very interesting. I think that's something we could take home from this very panel. We have time for 2 more questions. Maybe we collect them and then you get your last word. Please. Or, yeah, there and then there. Okay, good.
My name is Julia Bicknell. I was a BBC journalist for about 25, 30 years. And I left the BBC 5 years ago because I wanted to report on this very topic. And I now run a niche news agency called World Watch Monitor. I only focus on the global church, but I want to echo what Ahmed Shaheed has been saying. Look for the alternative voices. 85% of the world says religion is very important or important to them, and yet I don't think we hear those voices. So my question is, what would you recommend for journalists who want to become more religiously literate in the way that you've just been saying?
Thank you very much.
We collect another question. That was... Yes.
Thank you. My name is Minh Saleh. I am from the Kurdistan region of Iraq. I am writer, author. I have many articles about the freedom of religion, especially in the Middle East. I have a question that you know that the religion conflicts, but doctrinal conflicts are the main source for feeding war in the Middle East countries. We are in the Kurdistan region, which should to be a bit different. We have a particular law about guaranteeing the freedom of religion. The Kurdistan parliament issued a law number 5 for guaranteeing religious freedom. According to this law, everybody has the right to announce its own religion and be protected by the government. According to the fundamentalists, we are infidels. We are not Muslim because we are issuing this kind of law. And the Western world turned out to be not so supportive for our communities.
Could you come to your question? Ma'am, could you just come to your question?
Yes,
yes. Time is running out. Thank you.
Yes. Every 5 and 4 years, a group of fundamentalists would emerge and ruin everything. What's the solution beyond the Enlightenment? Is there any way for reform? And the Western world can offer any help for that? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think both questions have a related response that I want to give. And that is to say there are 2 kinds of literacies which are vital. One is, as you pointed out, literacy on religion. Very often, for whatever reason, we think we'll just accept what someone says about religion and run with it. In actual fact, all religions are so diverse, so complex, and there's so much diversity in views that we really need to represent the diversity. Populists thrive on simplified sound bites. We need to go beyond the sound bite to a more complex idea. And in the world of globalized and privatized media, I think it's very important that we look for those voices which may be not empowered to speak out, but using the media as a way to empower those marginalized voices, which are often victims of violations by the more dominant powers. The other is literacy on what is required by freedom of belief. Now, of course, if you look at the world, most countries have a law saying everyone has a freedom of religion or belief guaranteed under law. But in practice, it's very different. So it's really important to understand that rule of law is fundamental for anyone to enjoy any rights that are in the Constitution or laws. At the same time, communication within society, among society, different amongst faiths is important. And finally, education starting with the school curriculum. That's where a lot of the hatred, exclusion, and other narratives take root and go on from there. So so to summarize, I would say literacy on religion is important for everybody, including the media in particular, and also literacy on what freedom of religion or belief itself entails is important.
Thank you very much indeed. I think that you gave us many insights. We will most definitely take something home from this session. Thank you very much, Mr. Shaheed, and be safe.
Thank you.